he sort of said, "Hey, are you sure we can't persuade you to live a literary life?"
Hey everyone, we are back, and this week I've got Tom Ayling, the Antiquarian Bookseller, with me here today. Tom, I want to start off by asking your origin story. So how did Tom the Antiquarian Bookseller come to be, and how did that differ from like what Tom the kid thought he was going to be when he grew up?
Gosh. Well, I got into bookselling at university. I went to university in St Andrews up in Scotland, which is a beautiful, beautiful town. And they had an amazing independent bookshop called Topping and Company, who are quite well known for having beautiful bookshops in various parts of the UK now. So I started bookselling there one summer, kept going all through my fourth year, and fell in love with bookselling, and was very, very tempted to stay with them and do that after I graduated. But I was sort of toying up and weighing up in my mind whether I was going to do that or pursue a career in academia and move down to London. So I decided on the latter. And it's quite funny when I broke the news to Robert Topping, who with his wife Louise founded and run the business. He sort of said, "Hey, are you sure we can't persuade you to live a literary life?" In that kind of casual offhand way that he does, that is incredibly convincing. And as soon as he said that, I thought, I've made the wrong decision. And after a couple of months in London, sort of trying to get started in academia with further study and so on, I thought it just wasn't for me, and I missed bookselling. But I decided that rather than go back into selling new books, which is what I'd done previously and loved, I thought I'd go in a different path and enter the antiquarian book trade, which I'd had some exposure to through sort of handling rare books in special collections, looking at stuff I was researching. And I'd collected books for years, rare and antiquarian books, first editions, manuscripts, that sort of thing. So it was something I had an interest for, and decided that I was going to move into that sort of sphere in the bookselling world, which is more transferable than you might think. The material is very different, but the basics of getting people excited about books and telling stories about books are the same, and being in lovely surroundings, working with. So yes, gosh knows what 7-year-old Tom in his short shorts and school cap would think of that. But golly, he'd probably still be disappointed I wasn't be a professional footballer or cricketer or something.
Oh,
but,
no. Do you get back up to St Andrews?
Yes, I try to go as often as I can, which is about once every 18 months. I was up there last summer. COVID happening and not being able to travel abroad has been great in that regard, because we get to explore the beautiful parts of the UK that we don't get the chance to. So I've been a couple of times since COVID. I'm going again this September. So yes, whenever I can, try to drag myself north of the border. I do. St Andrews, I'm in love with it as a place. When I started collecting books, I started by collecting books about St Andrews, about the history of St Andrews, the town, the university, the golf. All of it. It's a place I adore, and I'd love to move back there one day, but that might be a retirement plan.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I've actually been.
Oh wow, yeah.
Which is crazy. It's such a small world, but yeah, in a past life I worked for a startup, and they asked me to come speak at St Andrews for their entrepreneurship week.
Oh, awesome.
So I got to go and give a lecture, and it's so beautiful. I think I had like one day to wander, and so I just like walked all the way around, and it was so beautiful. It luckily wasn't raining, and I remember I went to the botanical gardens too that were so lovely, and it's just it's a pretty magical place.
Yes, no, it's special, and there's something about small towns or small cities, things that used to be cities that are now towns, that still have their old core and aren't too built up around them, and the way it sort of perches on the edge of the rocks, you feel, there's one road in, one road out. You feel like you're you're at the edge of the world, and it's yes, no, lovely. You're making me want to drive up there this week.
Drive up there right now. I know. Well, the funny thing is too, I've been to a topping and company in Edinburgh. I went to the giant one that's in the bank, and I spent hours there. And I was with a friend that she left. She was like, I'm going to go because I had spent way too much time perusing, I guess. But I was like, I'm not ready to leave yet. So yeah, it's great.
That's the idea. They're proper old-fashioned bookshops.
Yeah.
You know, they have an extraordinary amount of books crammed in there. You know,
they do.
And that's really what was unique about it. I mean, St Andrews is a smaller shop than Edinburgh. Edinburgh is the most recent location, but you know, you can go in there and ask for any book on any subject, and it'll be
They'll
there.
And have it. Yeah.
More impressively, you can ask for any book on any subject, and the bookseller will be able to tell you without even looking at it on the computer. It's
like a lost art. That's why I think people connect so much with I think your content and other booksellers on Booktok, because you do know all the stories and the history. And I think there's a bit of that nostalgia or want of things lost or things gone.
We're better than the Amazon algorithm at finding out what you want.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What got you into reading originally? Like, have you always been a big reader even as a child, or like any authors from your childhood that you feel like stick out to you?
My parents really encouraged us. I'm the middle child. I have two brothers. Really encouraged us to read. So it was, you know, very much kind of mandatory reading every night before bed. You know, half an hour, an hour. Mm-hmm. Both myself and my brothers were all big readers, totally different readers. You know, with
interesting,
with different interests and very not too much overlap. But I mean, as a result, you know, we all became, you know, independent lovers of reading for pleasure, which I think is the key. You know, you sort of start out having to read before bed, and then you find yourself, you know, not turning the light out or starting an hour earlier or something. You know, when you get into it. I read a lot of historical fiction when I was young. I loved kind of, you know, Arthurian tales. Yeah. You know, I felt even then that, you know, I would read these stories and think I was born in the wrong age. They were probably the big things initially, and then I grew into reading things like the Lemony Snicket books. I remember absolutely devouring. So those initially, and then I suppose as I grew as a reader, it's sort of through what you're introduced to at school. So you're introduced to kind of the set texts of the British education system, right? Your you know, mandatory Shakespeare and romantic poets, and your modern novels, you know, Lord of the Flies, and you know, taking that as a jumping off point for exploring, you know, new writers, new genres.
Wait, so I have to ask, because I feel like no one in the States seems to. I grew up reading Susan Cooper. Like, I was obsessed. I don't know. Have you ever read any of her?
I haven't.
The Dark is Rising sequence. She's a British author, and I think the books came out. They're old, between the 70s and 90s, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And I love them so much. And there's 5 books in the series, but
yeah.
And they're probably, I think I read them in like middle school. So they're very, you know, for young kids, but yeah, they're definitely one that always sticks out.
I'll have to check them out and go on a little nostalgia trip.
You know? I know when you said Arthurian, I'm like, oh, I wonder if he's read these.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that was the other thing that really hooked me on reading, was that we had a great local library where I grew up. Very important. A really good independent bookshop with sort of knowledgeable booksellers. And at both the schools I went to, extremely good school librarians. Who would, you know, arrange events for authors to come and talk. I remember Caroline Lawrence, who wrote the Roman Mysteries novels, which are a great series of novels for children set in ancient Rome, came to our primary school to talk about them. And then, interestingly, on the sort of book collecting point, she then signed my copy, which I thought was like
the coolest thing.
Cool. but then she
Right.
turned to a page in the book and corrected a typo
Oh my
that
gosh.
only appears in the first edition. And like it just came back to me then that happened. And I was like, God, that was the first like bibliographic point I ever encountered when I was like, 6 years old talking to this author.
Oh my gosh. When did you decide to join Booktok? Like, what made you want to create an account?
I had a TikTok account before I started making videos. And it was actually, I created it for the randomest reason. We were doing one of these, like first lockdown in the UK, family quizzes were a big thing. I don't know if you had this, but like,
I don't think so.
We would like jump on Zoom and like you do like a quiz, right? And after a few weeks of this, everyone ran out of questions to do family quizzes because like, obviously. So then a cousin of mine had like as one of the rounds in the family quiz where you have to like do a TikTok dance. So, and this video will never be posted. Like this is like
we don't get a sneak peek of this one
at the bottom of my drafts forever. But yeah, so that's how I sort of got on the app. And then at the same time, obviously our bookshop was closed. Most days I was still able to go into work because I'd be packing up orders, taking deliveries, that sort of thing. But it was just me there. So I didn't come into contact with anyone else. Customers, began asking something they'd never asked before for videos of books because, they couldn't come to the shop and see us. We couldn't travel to their homes to see them and show them things, which is, pretty standard part of what we do. So I started filming little videos, and then I had this TikTok account that, frankly, was, as far as I'm concerned, was like a burner account. They were really bad videos for one thing. They weren't like done properly or anything. So it was just playing around with that, and it was really fun. Engaging with people in this sort of way, and for a long time, 10 people would watch a video, then 15 people would watch a video for like the first few months. And then I had a couple of did a video of a few cool books, and they got more views, and I decided to be a bit more consistent about posting. Creating good quality video content about rare books was something that I've been wanting to do for a while because it wasn't out there. There has for a long time been really, really good content about new books, BookTube and Booktok after it. Yeah, it sort of took off in a weird way, but
in a great way.
Amazing.
This is one of the follow-up questions, is like, what was that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, did you have a moment where you woke up and you were like blasted with notifications?
I was the drunkest I've been in maybe 10 years when the first video like went crazy.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Which was not good. I was at a dinner in London with some friends I hadn't seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember checking my phone like in a cab, like half asleep, and just like, I'd never seen my phone like it before, like just notificated up, just going crazy. And then I woke up the next morning, probably still drunk, and got on a train to go home. And just all these comments. I was just like replying to comments, like just as a means of like staying awake on the train so I didn't miss my stop. And
wow.
After that happened, I sort of told myself, okay, I'm gonna try and post every day if I can, and just try and keep putting stuff out there. So that first video was of a first edition of Pride and Prejudice. I got to work the next day about 5 hours late, and made a video of a first edition of Jane Eyre that went quite well. And then just went from that.
How long does it take you to create one of your videos? Because I feel like you put so much thought into the history and all of the storytelling elements that goes into one of your posts. So do you have a process for creating now?
for most of the content that I'm making that is directly, if it's a video like about something that we have in the shop, that's a kind of, so what I'm trying to do there is sort of tell an interesting story that does the book or the manuscript or the piece of art or whatever it is justice. So a minute video might take, a couple hours, and if it's a 4 or 5 minute video, it might take 3 or 4 hours, which is crazy. And then it might flop.
Enjoying this interview? Make sure you subscribe.
Tell us about the shop. Like, what is the story of the shop?
Jonkers Rare Books is the bookshop that I work at. They've been in Henley-on-Thames, which is a beautiful market town in Oxfordshire, for about 20-25 years. We specialize in rare books and manuscripts relating to English literature in particular, in its broadest sense, so covering children's books for adults, and that span really takes you from Chaucer to Harry Potter, and everything in between. But I would say we have a kind of sweet spot that takes you from Jane Austen until the Second World War. That period is where most of our books come from. And what we try to offer is the best and most superlative examples of their time. So if we've got like a first edition of Jane Austen, we don't just want a first edition of Pride and Prejudice. We want a beautiful copy in a contemporary binding with an interesting story or provenance behind it, and enough of those additional factors that take the book to the next level. About 10 years ago, we had the only known authorial presentation copy of a Jane Austen novel. It was a presentation copy of Emma, which is pretty cool. We bought, it's quite a good example. So it was a first edition of a novel called Kips by H.G. Wells, which is a romance novel that not many people have heard of because it's not science fiction, which is what H.G. Wells is better known for. But it was the copy of Kips that he inscribed for Henry James. And it says on the half title page, it's written in H.G. Wells, he's got this lovely, minute and precise handwriting. And it says, "For Henry James, who didn't send me a copy of The Golden Bowl, H.G. Wells." And the Golden Bowl, so this is 1905. The Golden Bowl is the novel that Henry James wrote in 1904, the year before. So it's a first edition. It's got a snarky inscription, and it links two of the greatest writers of their generation. And that's the sort of book that gets me excited. And the big part of what we do is sort of help people build really special collections. So working with people over a long period of time, advising them on what they add to their collection, helping them disperse with it if that's something they want to do. People have in their mind, I suppose, the archetypal book collector, and he's probably wearing a tweed jacket. But the wonderful thing is that book collectors come from all sorts of backgrounds, and part of the reason for that is that you can collect books on literally any subject in the world. Because anything that you're interested in will have a printed history. In fact, the reason that you're interested in it is because it has a printed history, and therefore it's a thing that people can talk about and learn about and get excited about. So we have people from all backgrounds in the shop.
I think it's incredible because I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of us, and I think especially during the pandemic, a lot of people rediscovered their love of reading, it seems like, just with the emergence of Booktok and just seeing like how quickly even like backlist books are now at the top of these bestseller lists again. And it's so wonderful to see people loving reading, and they're not just like, yes, we're all glued to our phones and technology, but still loving the written word. I wanted to know if you had thoughts on like why so few older books don't have dust jackets. Like, is it because they were seen as like packaging and just tossed, or did they disintegrate because they're so old, or did they just kind of fall apart?
The history of the dust jacket is a very interesting one, and it can be a very boring one. So there is like, trust me, there is a 3-hour version of this answer. But dust jackets began to be issued in books in the second half of the 19th century. So they're much, much older than people tend to give them credit for.
Yeah.
I've handled books from the sort of 1860s and 1870s with dust jackets.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, they are a kind of packaging material. They'd be very plain, very rarely decorative, often just the printed title on the spine, maybe the price, but nothing on the panels of the dust jacket.
Okay.
And then as you move through the 1890s into the 1900s, they're still very plain. You get a few that are a bit more decorative. If the front cover of the book has a design on it, you might get a design replicating that on the dust jacket. But basically from the 1880s, 1890s onwards, every book printed pretty much is going to have had a dust jacket originally. Right. The reason they don't survive is manifold. I mean, very few original bindings from the 1880s and 1890s survive, let alone their little bits of paper wrapped around them. They are ephemeral objects, essentially. And they were treated that way. Once someone had bought the book, it wasn't necessarily considered that the dust jacket had a role to play anymore. Right. So certainly some people threw them away when they got them home. Some booksellers threw them away when they received them at their shop. And the rest of it is an awful lot of wear and tear. 100 years is a long time for a book to survive, undamaged, especially its outer layer of protection, which is this thin piece of paper. So that's why so few survive. Because so few survive, those early dust wrappers are very, very valuable bits of paper. And the sort of survival of a rare dust wrapper will increase a book's value many, many times. The classic example everyone reaches for is, a first edition of The Great Gatsby without a dust wrapper is not a terribly rare book. If you wanted to own 5 copies of it and had a credit card with, a high enough limit,
you could find it. Yeah,
I could do that in an afternoon, and it would cost about $5,000, maybe $7,500 a pop. And a copy in the dust wrapper would cost you $250,000 up if it was in nice condition. So yeah, it makes a big difference. I mean, that is sort of a freak example in the fact that it's an iconic dust wrapper that was written into the plot of the novel, just because Scott Fitzgerald saw this design and was like, don't give that to anyone else. I'm going to put it in the book. But yeah, those sort of early dust wrappers are really lovely things to see, because you don't see 19th century dust wrappers very often. But Oscar Wilde's books in dust wrappers. We've had a picture of the first edition of The Picture of Dorian Gray in a dust wrapper, which is a beautifully, very Wildean design, very pared back. It just says The Picture of Dorian Gray, and then these little gilt emblems on the cover. It's a beautiful thing. I could go on for days about.
I love that. No, but I think that's the fun part, is like understanding the history and like why. And you tend to, I mean, a lot of your books, I assume you acquire by private auction most of the time, right? Or do you, like, what are some other ways that you guys end up acquiring books for the shop?
So as a business, we acquire books by any means necessary.
That sounds very ominous.
Yeah. Well, which is to say, any and all means.
Okay.
I probably, in terms of the split of my time, 80 to 90% of my time is looking for books.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's probably an 80-20, 90-10 split on the buying side. We're very particular about what we buy and the quality of books that we buy. And part of that is the service that we provide our customers. We sort through all the chaff, to get the wheat, and only offer the best quality and with our guarantee and so on. So we probably over the course of a year look at 5,000 to 10,000 books for every one book that we buy.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is a lot. Yeah. But the means that they come to us in broad terms, privately, which is to say people who own the books, either because they've bought them or inherited them or
Mhm.
whatever, come to us directly as specialists and want to sell to us. We go to book fairs all over the UK and all over the world. These are public book fairs that anyone can go to, but we buy books there as well as sell books there. And we buy books at public auction at places, like Sotheby's and Christie's, and today at Pierre Berger in Paris, but also provincially, scouring small auctions all over the country, all over Europe, all over America, to try and find good books. And you have to, it's not an easy thing. They're rare. We call them rare books for a reason, and that's because they're hard to find. So we cast our net very wide and are very particular about what we throw back into the ocean and what we keep.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite? This is so hard. It's like picking a favorite child, right? But do you have a favorite, or I guess most unique copy that you've ever sold?
I mean, lots of them is the answer. I'm very fond of everything that we deal in. My favorite things ever. There's two items that stand out to me that I'm particularly fond of, and they are in 1907. Ernest Shackleton led his first expedition to the Antarctic, and Shackleton is now known as a great leader of men and a great motivator. And part of the reason for that is he understood the human psyche. And part of the problem with going to the Antarctic is that you have a very long winter when there's no sunlight. So what do you do when you have a crew of men to keep motivated? And he decided that they would make a book. So they brought a printing press to the Antarctic. A couple of crew members had a few days training in London on how to produce a book.
Yeah.
And they took a printing press on a ship all the way to the Antarctic with the sole reason or the sole purpose that they could print a book when they got there. And the book they produced was filled with illustrations, stories, poems, little sketches, satires. And it was called the Aurora Australis, and it has a beautiful frontispiece of an aurora. And they bound the book in the cardboard in the packing crates that they took down with them, using horse reins for the leather spines. And it is genuinely one of the most beautiful books of the period. It's set against what you have in the early 20th century in Britain, something called the private press movement, which produced in small numbers very beautiful handmade books, letterpress printing, hand binding, often hand illumination. And considering that they made it in conditions where ink would freeze if you didn't keep a candle under it the whole time, it's quite extraordinary that they produced it. So that was a fun thing to have and to sell. And a corollary book to that is that they had a midwinter feast on these Antarctic expeditions. Midwinter's Day was very important. It's sort of an important festival that's still celebrated by, down at the station at the South Pole today.
Okay.
And for the occasion, they again printed by hand on their printing press a menu for the Midwinter's Feast. Oh. And they bound it in paper wrappers. And because it's a sort of very ephemeral thing, it's just a menu, it's extraordinarily rare. And we had the cook's own copy of the menu. So those are the two products of Shackleton's printing press in the Antarctic. And I sold those in 2019. And they're both in the same collection now. So after 110 years separated from each other, those two items printed by the same press are sat together again.
Wow. So what advice would you give to people if they were just wanting to kind of get into collecting rare antiquarian books? Like where do you start?
Find what you're interested in. Tell as many people as possible that you're interested in it. And that's a pretty good start. Book collecting is a very personal thing. So my advice would be collect what you're passionate about and what actually gets you excited. I genuinely think everyone has something that that fits those two things. Let's say, for example, that let's say it's Jane Austen, that you say that the thing that gets me more excited than anything in the world are Jane Austen novels. That's great. That's a wonderful and noble thing to be excited by. They're great books, and they have a great history as objects. Now, unless you're very, very wealthy or very, very lucky, you're not going to come across a first edition of Jane Austen in your local secondhand bookshop for £5 or whatever. So you think, okay, well, without abandoning Jane Austen, what could I buy that's really interesting? And one of the things you could do in that case is you could collect editions of Pride and Prejudice, not from the 19th century, but through the 20th century. And you can chart how that novel has been, both published and received over 100-year period, probably without spending more than £5 or £10 on a single item. And there are many, many books in the world that aren't that interesting on their own. But if you have a collection of them, they become more than the sum of their parts. So, a 1980s paperback of Pride and Prejudice might not be much more than just a vessel for the text, right? But if you had, every paperback edition issued by that publisher over a 30-year period, suddenly you're starting to tell a story with what you're putting together. So that kind of thing can be done very accessibly. When you start talking to people like booksellers, and this isn't an advert, but when you start talking to people who are very, very knowledgeable about a subject matter, about something that you're interested in, that can take you in some really interesting directions. And you might become that bookseller's Jane Austen customer. So when he gets something in or she gets something in, they'll call you and they'll say, look, I've just got this in, I think you'd like it. So book collecting doesn't have to be terribly expensive. Collecting first editions of the greatest works of literature ever written is expensive. But book collecting is more than that. And those things are wonderful, and they're a privilege to buy and sell. That's really, the majority of what I do is dealing in that sort of material. But there's a lot of very interesting stuff out there that can be bought, quite accessibly. And my own collections that I have, I very rarely spend a lot of money on a single item. Some of the funnest things I've ever bought have been for £5, £10, £15, £20, but they're still hugely fun things to have.
No, I so agree. It's funny because I do have a collection of Pride and Prejudice editions.
Hey, great. Hey, that was well chosen.
That was perfect. It's fun. And I remember I made a TikTok about this because I think there was a period of time where people were feeling, maybe because there's a lot of young people on the app, but feeling like, oh, we have to have a big bookshelf or a pretty bookshelf to be able to be a book talker or to talk about books. And it's you absolutely don't. And I think too, like, there's some of us that have been collecting for a long time. And I remember when I was in college, like I couldn't afford to go buy the fanciest, nicest books. And my first copy of Pride and Prejudice was like a $5 paperback. Like it wasn't anything special, but I love that copy. And like, I'll keep it always because of the memories attached to it. And so I think there's things like that I love that you bring that up, because I think a lot of times when people first get into books or see people's collections and they think, oh, I'm so far away from having that or ability to get those things. And it doesn't have to be expensive.
If you sort of like the idea of collecting books, but you're not sure what you want to buy, that's a great thing to do. Go to a bookshop or a book fair and have a look and pick up some things and look at them and see what gets you excited and see what gets the heart rate up a little bit, because there will be things that you don't know, that sort of serendipity of not knowing you're going to find something or like something. And I remember at university, those late nights in the library when you go into the stacks looking for the book that's going to sort of be the key thing to crack the essay you're working on, and how often it is that it's the book next to the book you're looking for that just sort of catches your eye, and that's actually the key. So yeah, going sort of diving in and getting your hands on these things is a great sort of entry. Yeah.
Well, and taking advantage of university libraries, like I was really lucky. So I went to the University of Washington up in Seattle, and we have like 26 libraries on campus. Like it's massive. And Suzzallo is by far like the most iconic one. It's the one that everybody takes the picture of, like the Harry Potter room, like the graduate room. And we used to go study there. It's like, God, these are just sitting in here, and people don't even know that these gems are on these shelves. Kids, if you're in college, go to your library.
Oh, absolutely. Befriend librarians.
Yes.
And especially if you've got a special collections at your university, and there will be things in there that will be related to your course, and all you have to do is send an email or go and talk to a librarian, and they will show you a book that's 100 years old, hundreds of years old, and you can go and look through it and be careful with it, and that sort of thing will enrich your studies and enrich your sort of understanding of it.
What are your favorite genres to read when you're not thinking about your rare collection? Do you have time to do that?
Yes. No, I do have time to read. As a bookseller, people think that we get to spend a lot of time reading, and the truth is that we don't. But we spend a lot of time sort of using books, researching. So using things like bibliographies and autobiographies and history books. So I occasionally read that sort of thing for pleasure, but I try not to too much, because it sort of feels like a bit of a busman's holiday. I read a lot of novels. I'm not really genre specific. I'm quite interested in mid-century British fiction. Writers like Anthony Powell and Elizabeth Taylor, Kingsley Amis I'm a great lover of. But I've been reading a bit more sort of contemporary stuff recently. That's probably a Booktok side effect. I would have thought, there's only so many times, when you see the book, come up on your FYP for like the 8th time, I was like, there might be something in this. And often there is. I read a lot of poetry. That's a great sort of escapism for me. And I like that you can sort of, dip in and out of it pretty easily. Because I work quite a lot. I'm basically, from sort of 8 until 8 or 9 most days I'm working. If you include making videos as working, which I do.
Yes, of course.
So sort of outside of those 13 hours, being able to sort of really get deep into a poem, I enjoy. And then I read, a fair amount of nonfiction, mainly history. There's a few different periods of history that I'm interested in. So yeah, I sort of try and keep it broad. And then if I just need something comforting, I'll go to my set of PG Woodhouse and pick out something I haven't read in a while, and be whisked off to Blandings, and perfect place.
Do you have a recent read that you would recommend?
That's a very good question. I mean, I just finished like 2 nights ago. I finished reading The Secret History, which I thought was brilliant. But I don't think that needs to be recommended, because it's like,
it's popular.
Be like me saying, have you ever heard of Shakespeare? Like, he's quite good. He'll go far. One thing that I have impressed on a few people of late, friends of mine, and I think mainly all of them have enjoyed it, or they've just been very polite about it, is a novel sequence by Anthony Powell called A Dance to the Music of Time, which is a 12-volume series of novels, published from the sort of in the middle part of the 20th century. And it's sort of often referred to as the sort of English Proust, whereas actually it's nothing like
it's Proust. Not like
it's entirely observational and outward looking rather than inward looking, but he writes with the most remarkable empathy and emotional intelligence. And you basically, it's narrated by a character called Nicholas Jenkins, and it takes him from being a schoolboy to being elderly. And you have this massive cast of characters that, float in and out of his life, like a dance to the music of time, which is a beautiful painting by Poussin that hangs in the Wallace collection in London. And as a sort of reading project, if people are into big reading projects, it's very fun, because each novel is relatively short. So what I say to people is,
so it's not like a Wheel of Time situation, or where it's 1,000 pages per novel.
No, it's a couple hundred pages per novel, very digestible. And what I say to people is, try a book a month for a year and see how you get on. And the feedback's pretty good so far. The Wheel of Time I tried to read.
I still haven't read it yet. I would like to, but
I've been halfway through the first book for about 6 months.
Okay.
But I thought it was tremendously good. I've just had other things have taken my attention in the meantime.
Well, I do feel like some of those books, like I've had like Terry Goodkind, like some of these, like Wizard's First Rule, I think is the first book, and it's I think well over 1,000 pages, and all of them are like that. And there's 10 or 11 of them, and it's a big commitment to when you have so many things that you want to read. And so I think sometimes, and I'm very much a completionist, where I like to read them all at once. I don't want to have to like wait in between. So then it's like you're stuck with that for a while. So I think that's why it's a big decision to commit. Yeah, definitely. What would be any auto-buy authors that you have? Like if you, and this can be recent, like not related to the shop, but just for yourself. Like, do you have any authors where you're like, if they come out with a new book, you're like, I'm 100% getting that? Or do you tend to, I know you said mid-century, so do you tend to have new books coming out?
I don't live entirely in the past, Ashley.
Okay. Just making sure.
Mainly in the past. I admit. Edward St. Aubyn. He's an English writer, best known for his Patrick Melrose novels, which the first 3 books came out in the early 90s, and then he finished the sequence in the early 2000s. I like Paul Muldoon's poetry when he has a new collection that comes out. He's an Irish poet. He's very good. Alice Oswald, who's a poet from the south of England, which is a long-winded way of saying there aren't many authors that I sort of auto buy, and that's probably just because I don't read enough contemporary. All my favorite writers are dead, so I just have a backlist to work through, which frankly is plenty to be getting on with. Right. I don't know if you have like reader's anxiety when you're just like terrified about all the books in the world that you haven't read.
Yes.
And
all the time.
It's daunting. And I was talking to someone about this last week, and we came to the conclusion that actually I could stop working now. I could never work a day in my life, and I could do nothing but read every great book that's ever been written. And I could do that for, let's say I live for another, 60 years, and I wouldn't get through them all. It's an insurmountable amount of reading. So that kind of pegged me back, and I was like, okay, I can chill out a bit and just, I think make peace with the fact that I'm not going to read everything.
But I think it also reminds you of it's okay to DNF a book. Like it's And I think so many people feel like, I started it, I have to finish. And I'm like, there are way too many good books out there to read something that you hate or just really aren't liking. And I like to give books a chance, to get into them. But I've gotten a lot more comfortable in the last few years. I think because of that, like thinking about, oh my gosh, I just have so many that I'm so excited to read. I don't want to waste my time. That I can't get back on something that's.
But also, it's supposed to be fun.
Right, exactly.
Reading's a choice, and it's a hobby. And yes, there is that sort of, for some people, a kind of high-minded element to it. But ultimately, it's it's supposed to be enjoyable. So no, absolutely, I'm a big proponent of, if you're not enjoying a book, just cast it aside, toss it in the bin, and move on.
Yeah.
No, that's one of the wonderful things about TikTok. The sort of mythical algorithm gets sort of a bad name in broader terms for kind of being this like brainless addictive thing, right? But one thing that it does brilliantly well is that it does bring people together with similar interests, and that is so important. Especially, there are so many niches on TikTok that we wouldn't even know about, because those videos wouldn't be put in front of us. But if you have like a really particular hobby and you want to find people, in that field, it does it for you. And I think that's a really really powerful and beautiful thing, especially if you're sort of feeling lonely or feeling like you don't know people who have similar interests. Being sort of connected in that way, I think is really wonderful. And there are obviously sort of other sides of TikTok that aren't wonderful, but I think it does deserve credit for that.
I remember telling somebody, because I think people still are, I'm old, and so I feel like a lot of people are always like, oh, a lot of my friends still don't have it, like they're not from college and stuff, and they're like, what is this TikTok? That's for kids and dancing people or whatever. They still think that. And it's funny because I'm like, no, there's so many, like, it's the app that brings me so much joy. Like, yes, I get frustrated, like I think we all do, about you spend hours on a video and it flops or whatever. But I think more than that, like I remember just getting through the pandemic and these lockdowns and just laughing. Like it makes me laugh so much. And the other apps out there, while I love them in different ways, I think there is a lot of that comparison trap that you can fall into, or you see the highlight reel of everybody's perfect life, and TikTok's where it's real. It's like half the time, at least as a woman, like half the time, most of us don't have makeup on. We're like not worried about it. Like it's just, it seems a lot more genuine than other apps. And I really love that aspect of it too, because it doesn't feel, you hate to throw the authenticity word out there, but it does feel a lot more authentic than other places.
Sure. One of the things that drew me to it actually was that none of my friends had it. And still none of my friends had it. Like I don't post.
Do they know that you have it?
Some of them do, but like not
okay.
Not all, like I don't post like reels on Instagram or anything like that.
Okay.
And the reason I don't do that, because my friends would see it and I'd be embarrassed, right? Whereas a million strangers, that's fine.
It's totally fine. It's so true. It cracks me up. Well, and TikTok every once in a while will ask you like, oh, do you want to connect your contacts? I'm like, no, absolutely not. Never.
Yeah. Probably my first like few months of consistently making videos, like I wasn't in any of them. It would just be me. Yeah.
Okay.
It would just be me just like
showing like voiceover.
Yeah. Not even my
voice. Okay.
No, it would just be me like showing a book with some like, I just make it on the app with some text over it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like that for like quite a long time. And then I like, sort of the lamest thing ever, but you sort of summon up the courage, like put yourself in front of the camera, and start filming yourself, which is like a weird thing to do, right?
Yeah.
And actually, like, I'm so glad I did, because you can connect with people more and make more interesting content and sort of put yourself into it a bit more, which I think is like provides value for the person watching it, but is also like quite rewarding. But yeah, I mean, even now when I look through, like when it says like find friends, and I scroll through that, like my Facebook friends that are on TikTok, like almost no one, which is great.
This is a question I ask everybody, is if you could visit any fictional land or universe, where would you go first?
Golly, okay.
I know, I've got all the hard questions.
No, absolutely. I could say Narnia. That would be quite sick.
Okay.
But do you know the sort of the Paris of the 20s that we get. It's sort of almost as cliched as saying Narnia or Middle Earth, but the Paris of the 20s that you get from reading, it's not even a fictional world, right? It's just the past. The Paris between the wars that we get from reading Gertrude Stein and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Pound and Henry Miller and people like that. I think that would be a fun time to be alive. And it would be a fun time. Do you know what, actually? It would be a very fun time to be a book collector. I would.
Oh, don't you wish there was time travel?
Yeah. I would raid bookshops.
Yeah.
I'd be buying, Shakespeare folios like they were going out of fashion. I'd have 8 copies of The Great Gatsby in a dust jacket. I'd get Fitzgerald to sign all of them. Yeah, no, that would be some superpower to sort of time travel through bookshops.
Favorite place to read?
The beach in St Andrews, West Sands.
Okay.
In the sand dunes there is the best place in the world to read.
And then your last reread, which I think you may have mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be the last time I reread Dance to the Music of Time. Would be the last thing I reread. Actually, no, more recently than that, I last month I reread The Great Gatsby for the first time in probably 6 years.
Oh wow! Okay.
I read it religiously as like a 16-year-old and could basically recite it, and then haven't revisited it since, for quite a long time. So yeah.
Okay. It's fun to go back to those old favorites. Like I used to have so many books that I would reread every single year, but then it's just kept growing, and then I wasn't getting a lot of new books. But yeah, it's nice because the books don't change, but we do. And sometimes you go back to them and they're like Gatsby is sort of getting that, it's sort of like a bowl of overripe fruit at a certain point, but then sometimes it's like going back and enjoying a vintage of wine that you haven't drunk in many years. I love that. Just as good as ever. What books are on your bedside table right now? Which, if you're packing, I totally understand if there are none. No, there are. I bought a nice pile of books at Waterstones a few weeks ago. So there was The Secret History. They were all kind of like Booktok-y books. Okay. So the Booktok-y ones were The Secret History and When the Coffee Gets Cold. That Japanese I don't think I've heard of that one. That everyone's been reading. Okay. And then the other things, I've got a book of short stories by Borges called The Aleph and Other Stories. I read the first story of that because it's narrated by an antiquarian bookseller, so it was like, okay. But I've got the rest of that to go through. Yeah, those 3 are the ones I'm in. There is actually probably nothing more exciting in what I do than the right book finding the right person. Yeah. That was okay. And it was perfect. Yeah, it was so great. But I don't know what that is in New York, because a flat white. We don't have them here. Yeah. Yeah. I was in New York in March and I spent like a week trying to get the coffee I wanted. And I got cups that big and I got cups like that big. So any books that you're looking forward to for the rest of the year that are potentially coming out, if you're reading anything modern these days? I don't think I could name a single book that's due to be published this year. When I was at Topping, I would be on it. You'd be on it, yeah. I'm sure there are tremendous books coming out. I'm just not the guy to recommend them anymore. People think that because I'm a bookseller, I've got like a sort of cupboard filled with stolen and destroyed Kindles that I've pilfered. But no, they're sort of my 1,000-page novel that no publisher will touch, right? Rather than the snippy, sensational short story that's all the rage.